we're going to turn our attention to the West Coast, as Bud just mentioned. We were looking at USC and how they were able to close, how Steve Sarkisian was able to close so strongly. Adoree Jackson, somebody who was looking not just at USC, but a number of big-time programs across the South. Juju Smith, down to a number of huge programs nationally. And then Damian Mama, the other five-star that you made reference to. I'd long thought to be going to USC, finalizes that decision. So in this class that USC is focusing on, offensive line, just speed all around. They appear to be doing, they're headlined by these top kids, but it seems like they've done a good job as they get closer and closer to moving away from those sanctions, building depth in places they've needed depth. We've seen the offensive line be less than adequate these past couple years at times, and I think the depth at offensive line is what impresses most about this class.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. We've seen in the past where USC could not protect the passer and could not consistently get a push up front in the run game, and back to the Pete Carroll, they could consistently do that. Matt Leinart was pretty much always protected, and they could always open big-time holes for Reggie Bush and Lendell White.
Yep.
Now that they get three guys who I think are guards, but I think out of the group with Vianney and then Toa and then Damian, I think one of those guys could probably end up playing tackle. Maybe Damian, if he slims down a little bit, he's currently 370. That's maybe kind of a kindergartner too big.
It's amazing where you have to say, maybe if he gets down to 340.
Right, exactly.
Down to 340, yeah. Okay.
And even if he does, I think he could make an early impact as a guard. Stamina may be an issue there at 370, but certainly a really talented player. And you're right, games are won at the quarterback position with special playmakers and then guys who put their hands in the dirt.
Right.
And USC is really doing a nice job there, making a difference up front.
Yeah, absolutely, addressing those needs. And then Juju Smith steps in, Marquise Lee, of course, and USC has been thin. A couple of guys they've had have been injured. Nelson Aguilar is the clear #1 next season, but obviously he should be able to come in and affect games, if not right away. And he's not on this list, obviously, because Adoree and Juju both just committed, but certainly have to be considered among or just at the top of that list.
But in fact, having them not on this list is maybe even a better thing for us because we do have guys, like a Chris Brown, like a Bryce Dixon, and really talented players that are signing up to play for USC. If we knew Sarkisian could recruit.
Yes.
Is he going to be able to turn this team into some more wins? How is his coaching going to be? I will say the challenge this year and going forward for Sarkisian is, and I wrote about this, is a lot tougher than it was when Pete Carroll was there.
Yeah.
UCLA did not have its act together like it does now. Oregon is really cranking. Stanford is recruiting at a whole nother level.
Obviously.
The two Arizona schools are doing really well as well, and I'm sure I'm missing somebody here.
Right. But even Chris Petersen closing.
Yes, exactly.
In the way
did
he's
a great
done,
job locking down the state of Washington at the end. It's going to be a challenge, and it's Pac-12 recruiting battles are a lot more fun now than they used to be.
Yes, absolutely. So we saw the list of 5, then you add in the guys that have committed since then. Who stands the best chance, given how they are made up right now, depth-wise, and the style of play they play? And, Adoree Jackson, everybody wants him. Is he physically on the same level as, say, like a Jabril Peppers or a Tony Brown or Marlon Humphrey?
I would say that Jabril Peppers has a lot more strength than Adoree and a lot more length.
Yeah.
But Adoree is probably more agile and perhaps a little bit quicker. And I love Adoree because he competes every rep. He really doesn't quit. He's got great swagger. And when you look at corners, and I just use swagger, so yeah.
Sure, no, it'll happen.
Some cornerbacks have that, and it's that confidence that, hey, you might have beaten me just now, but I've already forgotten about it, and I'm going to go beat you on this rep and shut you down. He's also a real difference maker in a return game. You like to see those young guys in the return game who can flip the field, make special things happen, on special teams, and I think Adoree is probably the pick there. All right, fair enough. Now Adoree most likely joins the defensive backfield with a ton of talent. We saw Sua Cravens go last year. Leon McQuay, and then McQuay. Yeah, so that is a backfield. As soon as they are able to build even more depth, you figure out who's going to be the nickel and so forth. Yeah. It's going to be a scary thing, especially in a Pac-12 conference that likes to move the ball quickly. Yeah. You need a deep defensive backfield to get those numbers there. You got to have that versatility, and you have to have the ability to have guys that can stay on the field, play multiple roles, multiple positions. And another school that has, I think, impressed you a lot with what they've been able to do on the defensive side of the ball, UCLA. Yep. Right across town. UCLA has loaded up not just in the defensive backfield, but a couple of really good linebacker recruits in Zach Whitley and Kenny Young. Along the defensive line, they've added a ton of talent. And then speed-wise on defense, adding Jaleel Wadood, adding a Darius Pickett, as you see on this list right here. Mm-hmm. They're getting more and more talented, and one of, if not the best defensive backfield recruiting classes last year for UCLA and what they did at the safety and corner positions. Who stands out to you now? Jim Moore is really building something at UCLA. It's not just, hey, they've got a nice class. They've put together a couple nice classes here in a row. They're not going away. Just because Sarkisian may have USC moving in the right direction, that challenge is a lot tougher now. I mean, you look at Pickett, who's a really nice corner with some solid agility there. Obviously, they pulled Kenny Young today, which is a very good hire, or not hire, excuse me, but a very good commitment for them. Active linebacker, but also has good size. I mean, he's not just a guy that runs around. He's 220, could probably play at 240, 235-ish, but a guy I think that can stay on the field for all three downs, and that's important, like we just talked about. This is a class, it doesn't have a whole lot of five-star type players, but when you look up and down the list, there's a ton of really good depth here.
Yes.
I mean, you go up and down, like, I like that guy too, and I like him, and wow, I remember seeing him. He's good.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so UCLA, so who sees the field early on? Who's at that point physically? Who gets the game? Whose game slows down for them the most when you look at the list of UCLA commits that could come in? They lose, a couple big key linebackers in Zumwalt and Anthony Barr to the NFL. They're on offense, it's an up and down year. They're probably not going to be able to count on Miles Jack to play 15 snaps on offense a game. So, it's Adrian Clem, who I know you like a lot, his ability to recruit the offensive line and recruiting and developing kids. So who are the names that pop out immediately for 2014?
Like you mentioned, they have guys that they're missing at linebacker now. I would say Kenny Young or Zach Whitley. One of those two guys has got to be able to step up, and if not start, at least give them some quality snaps. I mean, football is not a contact sport; it's a collision sport. You have to have quality depth. It looks like UCLA is finally building that now, on defense. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And long-term projects with UCLA. Any names that you? I mean, I'm not going to put you on the spot too much, but with UCLA's class,
trying to remember all who they got now.
Yeah, no, it's been an interesting class. They didn't really. At the quarterback position, it wasn't a huge need this year. They went after Brad Kyle late, the Miami quarterback commitment. But are you happy with this class? Is this something that you feel like sets them up for years to come?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they were in on Adoree, I guess technically, but it wasn't really somebody that I thought they had a real good shot to sign.
Right.
I feel like they did a very nice job getting most of the kids they should have been able to get. I'll give you a name here though. Sure. Dwight Williams is an undersized linebacker, Adoree Jackson's teammate, but I think a guy that really plays all over the field. He needs some time in the weight room to put on some size. 205, you really can't play linebacker in a Pac-12. It's a very physical league, despite what some people think. You give that guy a year, maybe 2 years to develop, he could be something really good if he's able to add on some good muscle.
All right, Stanford's class this year, of course, they have Solomon Thomas commit to them today over a number of big national schools. Not the same number of heavy hitters as we've seen perhaps in years past, a couple of years ago with the offensive line class with Andrus Peet and who else? Kyle Murphy, and then the kid from Washington, the guard.
Garrett.
Yes,
Josh Garrett.
with Josh Garrett. So not that kind of year where there's the heft at the top, but how do you evaluate what Stanford's been able to do this year? And then they have a big-name quarterback. They get the big-name defensive end today. What have they done between?
It's not so heavily concentrated on just one position, like you mentioned, but they have done a nice job of filling most of their needs. I mean, they get Solomon Thomas, who's a really nice pass rusher out of Texas. They keep Keller Christ home in the Bay Area.
Large quarterback.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a really well-built 6'4", probably 230, 225. He's a big kid with a big arm, a very Stanford-style quarterback, very prototypical pocket passer type. They do go get some offensive linemen. They get Riley Gibbons. They flip him from Miami. They get Casey Tucker out of Arizona, who I think are two guys I don't think are going to play early. But they have good athleticism.
And that's a good thing. If you're in a position where you don't need top kids to play early, there are very few schools that can offer that.
Yeah, if you're especially on the offensive line. The saying goes that the closer you are to the ball, the tougher it is to play early.
Yes.
So quarterbacks,
makes sense.
Linemen, because you have to have a certain physical maturity or just experience in the system with quarterback. Corners and receivers are able to play a lot because a lot of it's just how fast are you and your agility and stuff like that. So they did a nice job with that. I like Christian McCaffrey a lot. I think he offers some versatility maybe they haven't had in terms of guys you can both run and catch. You can use him some in the slot. You can use him out of the backfield as well. I like him. They signed Dalton Schultz, who is one of the best tight ends in the country.
Absolutely.
I don't know if he's the best, but I really like the Penn State kid.
And last year was the first year in a long time where we didn't see dominance from the tight end position with Stanford. They had those years where they had three guys at all times that could kill you. Last year, there was some injury concerns, but it was a down year for Stanford at the tight end position.
I think the most important thing Stanford did, and this will be a little bit underrated because some of these kids are a little bit down in terms of their rankings. They added athleticism in the back seven.
Yes.
They get a Joey Alfieri. Brandon Simmons is a very athletic kid out of Texas at safety. Elijah Holder can definitely play. Terrence Alexander is a really nice get. They beat out Notre Dame and I believe Ole Miss as well today.
Not bad.
For us. That's what they've needed because we see them win some games. And in other games, they just can't cover people. You have to be able to man up sometimes, play good man coverage, or play some sort of varieties of coverage with some better athleticism in the back seven. And I think you're able to do that now.
Stanford's also an interesting situation because they they do recruit nationally, and they kind of have to recruit nationally because their standards for getting into the school are so much different and higher than a number of schools they're recruiting against. And the area that they've actually succeeded really well, it's not a surprise, but the South. Georgia, the Georgia pipeline, they've recruited all over. They've recruited in Virginia. I think that's where the quarterback is from. Why am I blanking on the quarterback for Stanford's name?
Oh, Keller Chris?
Lights. No, their current quarterback.
Oh, and I'm blanking on it too.
Yeah. It happens. We watched a lot of Stanford this year. In any case, yes, they're recruiting everywhere. Do you see the turnover on the staff? Because we're seeing Derrick Mason move to Vanderbilt. We saw their offensive coordinator leave. Do you see the turnover perhaps affecting how Stanford's been able to recruit nationally? Just because it's Kevin Hogan, by the way. What they've been able to do on the recruiting trail.
You know, we didn't see it as much this time because I think a lot of these kids have been recruited by Stanford the full time.
Right.
And a lot of times Stanford will start recruiting you early, but they say, you know, we don't really have admission for you yet. You have to continue your good academic progress to show that you can handle the rigors of Stanford. And so these kids are pretty locked into Stanford. A lot of times, once Stanford clears them, like I know when Terrence got cleared, he was very excited about being cleared to get admission into Stanford.
It's hard to turn down Stanford.
Right.
If you're good enough to play there now, because there is a high level now expected, and you're good enough in the classroom to get into Stanford, it's real difficult for me to imagine.
Arkansas thought they had Solomon Thomas. I mean, they thought his visit went great, and the feedback they were getting.
Of the South,
and
University
Stanford
of
beats
Arkansas.
Exactly. You slipped it in on me. That was good. That was really good.
Yeah.
I think that it is important because you have to find the right fit for Stanford. Not every kid can handle the academic rigors, and not every kid can handle the environment there. I mean,
it's very different.
It's a special kid that needs to go to, or a special type of kid that needs to go to Stanford. I think they're doing a good job, but staff turnover is always a question. I mean, Derrick Mason was a very good recruiter and a very good coach for them. And you know, will the new staff be able to replicate that? I think that's a question for next year for sure.
And to sort of splinter off of that, Derrick Mason at Vanderbilt, I know that's obviously in a conference that you are closer to physically. Yeah. Do you expect him to be able to not replicate, because everybody points the academics at Stanford, academics at Vanderbilt, still two very different situations, because Vanderbilt in their own backyard has to compete with so many heavyweights. But are you bullish on him? Do you feel like he's going to do a good job continuing what James Franklin was able to do in attracting talent to Nashville?
I'm bullish on him as a coach.
Yes.
But I think I am very bearish on his situation.
Yeah.
If you look at what James Franklin did, he won, 18 games in the last 2 years, I think 2 9-win seasons, which is kind of unheard of at Vanderbilt back-to-back. Florida had crazy injuries this year. Georgia did too. Vanderbilt beat them both. You had Tennessee that was going through some real turmoil.
Yep.
They were very down. Kentucky was pretty much an automatic win for Vanderbilt over the last couple of years. Now Mark Stoops has them on the rise. Tennessee's on the rise. Florida and Georgia are probably not going to have that level of injuries again.
Right.
And I think the West keeps getting tougher and tougher. Their cross-divisional opponent is actually Ole Miss every year. Ole Miss keeps getting better. It's going to be very difficult. Even if he were to recruit a little bit better than what James Franklin did, I still think their win total will be less by a game or two per year, because it's just the rest of the league is getting better at a rate quicker than what Vanderbilt is.
Right, sort of like what's happening in the Pac-12, which with USC's situation, it's a lot harder to just win. That the talent level is so much higher. There's so much more money in the conference that people are spending to make themselves more attractive. So it's a fair point. And then the team I think everybody's been waiting to talk about in the Pac-12, my Oregon Ducks. The Oregon Ducks with a really impressive class, just more high-level recruits than ever before, perhaps. You know, it might be colored by the fact that they missed out on a few at the sort of last second with John Juju Smith committing to USC, and then Trey L committing to LSU. But they get Matrell McGraw out of I believe Louisiana. He's from New Orleans.
Yeah, Orleans good.
And so they fill a need there. They're losing a couple safeties this year. When you think about Oregon's class, how is it defined this year? Do you like the talent level that they're bringing in? Do you feel like it's a downgrade from what they've had, an upgrade from what they have, or they're just on the same plane?
Yeah, I think it's probably an upgrade. Oregon's really loaded this year on the field, obviously.
Yes.
So you do have some kids that you don't have to press into action immediately. They can really take their time and develop at the right pace. And then you have some guys who may be able to come in and make an earlier impact. I mean, you get some difference makers in the secondary. You address both offensive and defensive line some.
Yep.
You get some immediate help at guard, which we know was a need this year.
Yep.
Obviously, with Losi out of the junior college, the big dude there. You get Royce Freeman, who is an interesting back for Oregon, because Oregon has traditionally gone, or not traditionally, but at least recently, gone with smaller backs.
Yes.
And Freeman is a bigger, more stout type of back. He's not as talented as Jonathan Stewart, because Stewart was a total freak, but He's a very different type of back, and I think somebody who could provide Oregon some much-needed tough interior running as well.
Yes.
It's a very balanced class. Like I don't really know that there's a need that Oregon didn't hit on. Maybe another difference maker.
Oregon
receiver.
fans will tell you defensive tackle.
Okay, well
that's been because they lose a couple.
It's tough to get out there though.
Right,
I mean, west of the
very
Rockies,
tough.
That's such a commodity out there. It's just not available. I mean, how many elite defensive tackles?
It's true.
Grow up west of the Rockies? Hardly any.
It's absolutely true. And year in and year out, you hear that refrain from Oregon fans, like we're making these inroads in the South, but it's for 4-3 guys.
Right.
It's for Takoy Sumler. It's for guys that are this
guys who are
Charles
attracted to
Nelson
playing
and
in
Tony
space.
James. Right. But they're not attracting. And part of the reason it seems, and what we've heard somewhat, is these guys don't want to play in a fast system. They're big.
That's probably a good point, actually. Yeah.
And they don't want to practice they don't want to just. I mean, not that they don't want to practice, but they don't want to practice at that pace where it's not a big guy friendly program. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's some of what you hear.
I would buy that some other pace schools are able to get defensive tackles, but I think geography has a lot to do with it.
But they're closer. Yes.
Right. Like Auburn runs a really fast pace, but they're able to get big.
They're dealing with a much bigger pool of guys to find guys that are willing to play in that pace.
Right. Like elite defensive tackles fit in every single system. Like there's no defense that says, we don't want elite defensive tackle play.
With great guys that are giant and fast.
The guy who's 320 and can move like that. Nah,
right. Nobody's turning them away.
Now, there's no program that's like necessarily that much more attractive to those guys. I don't think like Oregon is really attractive to these elite playmakers who like to get the ball in space and are able to quickly get upfield and run and score touchdowns. And Stanford has carved out a really nice deal for itself with these multiple offensive line sets and playing power football.
Yep.
But I don't know that you can do that defensively. I don't know if there's any place you can go and say we are all about defensive linemen.
Right.
Because everybody's going to make that pitch.
Yep.
There are not enough humans that are that big and that athletic on earth.
That's absolutely true. So who stands out if we look at the Oregon's class one more time, or at least the top of the class? Who stands out as the guys immediately with Oregon's situation? You mentioned they're loaded on the field, particularly at quarterback with Marcus Mariota coming back, and Morgan Mahalit comes in. Not a guy with a ton of starting experience in high school, but appears to have a lot of potential. And Royce Freeman, you mentioned at the running back position, offers a new wrinkle. They have a couple of running backs back in Byron Marshall and Thomas Tyner, but they're not big guys. So are those the guys? I mean, obviously not Mahalik, but is it Royce Freeman that you expect to have the biggest immediate impact?
I think Freeman could, depending on how the inside run game works out for Oregon. But I also think shoring up that offensive line, particularly on the interior, being able to run inside zone and outside zone, and I think you do that potentially with your four-star guard you signed out of junior college, Losi.
Yeah.
Or Lucy, if I'm saying that correct.
Right.
A big-sized guy, about 300 pounds, 6'4", 6'5", that's what you want in the interior. To me, when I was watching Oregon this year, it seemed like they did not get great movement with their guards at times. And that's somebody, if you sign a junior college player, you don't sign him because he's a developmental player. You only have him for 2 years, so he better come in and go now. And I think Arian Springs, I know that Oregon is really loaded in the secondary, but he's a very good player as well. A kid I really like, a top 5-6 corner in the country, I think.
Out of the state of Texas. All right, right now we are going to go to a Pac-12 expert, if there ever were one, Avi Kunath from Pacific Takes. Big day in the Pac-12, all sorts of 5 stars and 4 stars signing everywhere. Teams are appearing to be more talented than ever before in terms of what they've been able to do on the recruiting trail. Avi, can you hear me? How is your day going?
Going pretty well. How's your day going?
It's going pretty well. I can't complain. I wish there were just more dramatic stories other than a couple of kids whose parents aren't signing letters of intent, but not so bad. What to you is the headline of the Pac-12 signing day?
That's got to be USC. They pretty much got every player they wanted and probably needed to get in this class. Steve Sarkisian had to come in with about 2 months of preparation and try and secure a lot of these guys. And this is why USC hired Stark, because he's really good at knowing all the players down in Los Angeles. He has really good recruiting connections with everyone. And they got Adoree Jackson, they got Juju Smith, and I think it's just a really solid class for the Trojans today to get all the guys that they needed to get.
All right, and when you look around the conference, who are the names that strike you as the best of the best in terms of signees within the Pac-12? Who will this class be best remembered by when you look not just at the 5 stars, but there are guys that can impact teams because of depth issues or attrition? who are the names to you that, and we have some early impact names in front of us, but to you, who are those guys that are not 2015, 2016 guys, but 2014 names?
It's tough to say because this year was not a particularly strong one for the Pac-12 in terms of recruiting. I mean, we have a lot of good classes, but compared to previous seasons, it's a little bit of a drop in terms of overall talent. This is more of a depth class for a lot of guys. Like UCLA got a lot of talented guys, but they are so stacked in so many positions that I'm not sure how many will actually contribute. USC, I mean, I think if you have to look for impact guys, you'd have to look back again at the Trojans because they do have those depth issues. It's the last year of the scholarship restrictions. This is the last year that they have to deal with not having enough players to put in certain positions. So I think you'll see guys like Jackson and Smith and maybe Bryce Dixon get a chance to play early and play often because they don't have enough guys to suit up.
One of the more interesting stories in the Pac-12, both just administratively and when you talk about football, but also with recruiting, is Chris Petersen and the job that he was tasked with and that he's done since taking over at Washington. You know, a lot of the stories today have revolved around USC, UCLA, and Oregon and the major national names that they've been in on, but Washington and Chris Petersen have quietly closed on a number of top kids. Were you surprised at all by his ability to come in right away and be relevant when he was at Boise State, a very good team, but not necessarily a huge name on the recruiting trail?
I'm not terribly surprised because Petersen really knows how to recruit Los Angeles and he knows how to recruit California. So he was able to find a lot of guys in those regions. I mean, he's really good at scouting all over the West Coast because he has to bring in guys that kind of fall under the radar. Right. And he has those connections built in. So he was able to land a bunch of guys that, I mean, they're really going to help him. Caleb McGarry, the offensive guard, was just probably the second best recruit in Washington. He got Butta Baker to flip from Oregon. Yep. And you got KJ Carter-Samuels. So they even got another quarterback where the Huskies are pretty stacked in terms of depth. So I think Petersen is just a really underrated recruiter, and I think it's starting to show dividends, and he has a shiny new stadium in Seattle, too.
Yes, he does. A couple of schools that actually run a very similar system have a couple of, we'll call them charismatic coaches. Mike Leach and Sonny Dykes, certainly not on the level of the royalty of the Pac-12 in terms of the talent that they were able to bring in, but also doing a good job recruiting to their system, figuring out the fits for the Cougars and the Bears, respectively. Are there diamonds in the rough? Are there big wins for them on the recruiting trail? Who were the winners in the classes for Washington State and Cal, if any?
I would say that in terms of Washington State, I mean, they just know how to recruit wide receivers. They have a bunch of guys that are coming in. Zaire Andre is one really talented prospect who had offers and interest from a bunch of Pac-12 schools. Yep. They had a lot of, I would say, they were able to attract a lot of interest from a number of different players. Like Leach recruits Florida. He goes all over the place to find players that you never hear of, and they turn out to be diamonds all over the place. Right. So I think Leach is really good at finding those wide receivers. In terms of Cal, it was a pretty decent class. I would say that they were able to find the running backs they didn't have last year. They got Trey Watson from Centennial, and they got Vic Nweri from Texas. They have a power back and a scat back, so they have two guys who can go outside and inside, and that'll give them a little bit more depth in that place. And they got Eric Brown, who they managed to flip from Washington, too. They have another solid wide receiver to go with pretty much the only strength of their team, which is the receiving core.
All right, and I think one of the more interesting stories, other than Washington and how they were able to close and Chris Petersen evaluating talent later on in the process, is the fact that Rich Rod and Arizona State, I wanted to forget Todd Graham's name, but I just couldn't. Rich Rod and Todd Graham actually doing year over year just a better and better and better job of bringing in talented kids that the recruiting services and the analysts like a lot, to not just come in and eventually be good, but you're talking about more and more early impact guys at positions all over the field. What struck me, interestingly enough, about Arizona is they're doing well on defense. How would you evaluate the job that Rich Rod is doing in addressing needs and finding guys who can contribute sooner rather than later, especially with the turnover that Arizona is now dealing with.
Oh, Arizona brought in a very strong class. They needed a lot of the guys that they got this year, and I think they were able to appeal to the fact that a lot of these guys that would get immediate playing time, because that is not they had a very inconsistent defense last year, and they needed to upgrade in a hurry. And I think they got a lot of guys that could impact early. They got Marquise Ware from Salish, and they got Jamadre Cobb. They got both of those guys, both outside linebackers who are perfect for the 3-3-5. And they had Marcus Griffin, who flipped from Washington State earlier today. They got Rodney Carr, an athlete who could play safety and wide receiver.
Yep.
They have a lot of talented defenders because Arizona, I mean, they have the offense to compete with anyone, but that defense sort of gives it away a couple of times.
Yeah, and Arizona State with a class of their own that really addresses a number of the same things that Arizona was able to address with their class, and finding guys on defense, of course, with how successful they've been these past couple of years. Will Sutton, Carl Bradford, Junior Onieli, a lot of talent has come out of Tempe, and they're bringing in some more this year. Is Todd Graham building something to consistently compete for the Pac-12 South, especially as USC and UCLA are getting to the levels that they should always be?
Yeah, it's a transition year for Arizona State. I think they lose a lot of their defenders, and they managed to address most of their needs this year. They got Connor Humphreys, a strong defensive end, and Tashawn Smallwood to kind of fill in that Will Sutton role.
Right.
And they managed to get DJ Calhoun from El Cerrito, who's probably going to be one of the top pass rushers in the Pac-12 in the upcoming years. I think he's just one of those guys you should look at and consider him as a instant impact player because they need that kind of defensive influx. I would say the Sun Devils have got a lot of good guys in that are going to contribute in a way that will help their offense sort of get to a better place than it was. Like the ASU offense was good last year at home, but kind of had their inconsistent moments against better teams. So I think Arizona State's in a good position to compete year after year, and they did sign probably their best class since Todd Graham's got there.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there reason for hope with what Colorado has been able to bring in? Do you see this team's talent level improving? Utah has been a team that has been pretty good, but I'd like to focus, if you can, on Colorado's class. It appears that they're getting a little bit better in terms of the quality of kid they're bringing in. Is there reason for optimism with the latest influx of talent?
I'd say so. I mean, Colorado did manage to get Shea Fields, who was committed to USC, and is going to try and he's pretty much like a Paul Richardson clone.
Right.
He's a little bit smaller, but he's speedy. So he's kind of that dynamic playmaker who can come in and be a number one receiver pretty quickly. In terms of depth, I mean, they got a lot. They got some JUCO guys. Cal had the same strategy. They had to fill in with some JUCOs, but they also managed to recruit Colorado pretty well, and they got some guys from around, but I don't know if they have like a lot of talented guys. I think it's going to be a long haul process where Mike Mack is still going to have to produce some results on the field. Colorado only won one game in the Pac-12 last year, so they have to sort of just keep on building up slowly. I mean, he showed some signs against some of the good teams last year, but I mean, they have to continue that upward tick.
Fair enough. And so if you had to give me, and this will be my final question, I'll let you go enjoy the rest of your Pac-12 signing day. If you had to pick one player because of circumstance who will get the sorts of reps needed to do so, who is your Pac-12 freshman of the year in 2014? True freshman of the year.
True freshman. Well, gotta think here
on
about
the spot.
that one.
So you got some talent coming into Oregon on the offensive side of the ball that's been impressive. You have obviously a cornerback and a wide receiver and Adoree Jackson and Juju Smith on both sides of the field for USC. UCLA gets some playmakers. Who stands out to you as the breakout freshman star of 2014?
I would have to say Jackson for USC just because I think the Trojans are losing one or two guys in the secondary this offseason, and they have to plug him in pretty quickly. And I think he's the kind of playmaker who the Trojans kind of need. They need someone who will kind of plug up in the back. And I think him along with Craven, they're going to be really talented next year. That secondary is going to try and take it back up to the way it used to be. And I like all those guys in the Trojans to contribute early.
Perfect. Avi Kunath from Pacific Takes, the destination for all things Pac-12 on the interwebs, but it happens to be on SB Nation. It happens to be on SB Nation. Avi, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your signing day.
Thank you. You too.
Perfect. So there's Avi running through the Pac-12, and I think you might not see completely eye to eye in terms of your evaluation of the talent level coming in. He sort of saw it as more of a depth year, but you like the sort of height of talent coming into the conference.
You know, I can agree with Avi in that I think that there have been other years with more overall talent, and I think next year certainly has more talent out west.
Interesting. Okay.
But I think that the lack of talent sort of highlighted just how intense the competition was. For
yes.
When you don't have an exceptional year talent-wise out west, you see teams having to go and try and recruit more nationally, and then you see teams really, really fighting for these talented prospects because not everybody is going to get kids. I mean, people are going to lose jobs over this because they're not going to win enough ball games because there are so many good coaching staffs in that conference now, and they're all fighting to get these kids, and you don't see teams signing 15, 18 four-star type prospects. It's tough in that league.
Who have you been impressed? We talked about Washington and Cal and Stanford. We talked about Stanford before, Avi, but we talked about Washington, the Arizona schools. You particularly were pretty impressed with what the Arizona schools were able to do this year on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I don't know when the last time it was that both those schools were really well coached.
Right.
Whether or not, whatever we think about Todd Graham, I think we can all agree he's a pretty good coach.
Yeah.
And so is Rich Rod.
Won the Pac-12 South in his second year, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So those two are battling just every single day on recruits. Everybody was pretty interested to see what Petersen would do once he got to a program with real resources.
Yes.
And, all respect to Boise and stuff, but that's not, come on, let's be real. I thought he did a great job at Washington. And as a fan of a team in the Pac-12 North, what do you think when you see that he's been able to do that in just 6 weeks? I mean, just lock down Washington. That's a pretty big deal, I think.
If a coach at Washington can lock down the state, there's enough talent there that you have Oregon and Stanford in unique situations with the sort of flashiness that Oregon presents that no other school in the country can match in terms of their relationship with Nike. And then Stanford, which no other football power in the country can match really in terms of their academics.
Exactly.
So it's a unique situation, but the thing that would scare me most is the fact that Chris Petersen's a really good coach now getting talent. And Steve Sarkisian was always able to get talent, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, but for some reason he won 7-8 games a year. Chris Petersen was winning games, granted against lesser competition, but also with talent that he had to really, really scout himself, and the staff had to do themselves. Whereas now he is going to, I feel like with his ability to coach, his coaching acumen, attract higher and higher level kids. And even if that's just in the Northwest, even if it's just in the state of Washington, look at the kids that Washington has lost out on recently from the state.
Exactly.
Taylor Mays, the guard we just mentioned, Josh Garrett to Stanford. There are kids going everywhere. Even looking back, Michigan, I feel like they had I'm forgetting the offensive lineman's name. But you understand what I'm saying. But like the level of talent in Washington is not insignificant. So Washington immediately becomes a more dangerous team on the count of having one of the probably 5 best college football coaches in the country.
Oregon has pretty much run this conference for the last couple of years, with Stanford kind of as the 1B to the 1A. But do you see that? Do you feel like it's going to be tougher to for one team to do that going forward, or do you think that maybe some team will emerge to do that, or do you think there's going to be more parity?
I think there's a lot of B+, A- in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
And it's that much harder to be an A team, which actually it makes what Nick Saban and Les Miles have done in the SEC that much more impressive, because they've been dealing with something like that for a number of years. The only difference is they've had a number of teams in their division with a ton of turnover. Texas A&M just recently coming in. Ole Miss finally becoming a player in recruiting. And then, Mississippi State being up and down, Auburn being up and down. Right.
Winless in the SEC.
Right. And then you have Arkansas with everything they've dealt with, from being an SEC West contender to the depths that they've fallen. Yeah. So they've been so up and down, whereas I think in the Pac-12 especially, and even looking towards like the 14 playoff, I think you're going to get a lot of 10-2 teams that are on the outside looking in, just because everybody's going to beat up on each other.
How many staffs can you legitimately argue are the best staff in the Pac-12?
It's tough. You can't with Oregon anymore, I don't think. I think there are question marks at a couple of coaching positions there.
Stanford, I don't know if we can anymore because obviously David Child's made some mistakes and they've lost a lot of guys. But I think there's still a lot of really good staffs there. And it's just,
who's the best? Is it UCLA's? They've got a lot of assistants that do really well on the recruiting trail. I'd like to see them win a division first.
Yeah, winning is
or I guess they won the South, but win the conference first before we can to dub them
Some
the
people
best.
don't like Mazzoni as much as others.
Right.
I think everybody loves Clem on defense. They do a really nice job usually.
Long term, if Arizona's staff is able to stay together, I think that's dangerous as hell because what can you attract when you're in the Southwest? You can attract speed. Arizona's already looked into Texas. They've looked into Southern California. You can attract speed. Rich Rodriguez has that reputation. That's suddenly very scary. I think the most complete staff, it might still be Oregon, just in terms of the experience they have recruiting the West Coast and winning the conference. But it's by no means any sort of long shot. And what David Shaw's been able to do as a head coach certainly puts them right there, too.
The Pac-12 is fun to follow this year. It's going to be a lot more fun next year because the battles are only going to be even more intense and the talent level is going to be even higher. I think it's a nice year west of the Rockies, especially at the quarterback position. You're going to have multiple teams going after big-time blue chips.
Absolutely. And the quarterback position alone in the Pac-12 next year, it should be fantastic with USC, UCLA, Oregon, Oregon State, Stanford. I'm trying to think who isn't returning. Washington doesn't return Keith Price, and Arizona, I don't believe, has B.J. Danker, but there's a lot of guys coming back. So that not only that, and in terms of recruiting, you have a lot of kids that want to play for experienced quarterbacks. So it's not a bad deal at all for the Pac-12 looking forward. So pretty good. And Washington, as you mentioned, doing a good job locking down local talent and finishing strong. UCLA, USC, Oregon, Stanford appear to be the class of the conference at this point, but it's scary, scary prospect if you want your team to end up in the Final Four of
There's
college
a lot
football.
of teams that I think could go, well, I guess they play 4 league games out there, but you could go a lot of teams I think could go anywhere between 6-3 and 3-6.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a ton of parity like that.
Absolutely.